Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Success Insight podcast. Today's episode of Success Insight is another addition to our Outdoor Adventure series. Our guest today is Elinor DeWire. Elinor is an award-winning researcher, photographer, and writer about lighthouses. You'll recall that Elinor joined us on Success Insight back in January of 2020 before our lives took a hard turn. During that episode, we learned about Elinor's fascination and passion for lighthouses and how this informed her career pursuit. Now, we're going to provide you a link back to that episode, but really, Elinor has been researching, photographing, writing about lighthouses since the 1970s. She has visited more than 800 sentinels in the United States. I'm sure that number would have been higher if not for 2020, but she's visited the sentinels in the United States, Canada, the Caribbean, Europe, New Zealand, and Australia. She's the author of over 20 books and more than 250 articles on the subject of lighthouses. Elinor, it's a pleasure to bring you back to the Success Insight podcast in our Outdoor Adventure series.
It's my pleasure, Howard. Thank you.
Fantastic. As I have been really getting more experience being outside in the desert, I think when we met back in January 2020, coming out west had not even been on my radar, let alone COVID-19. And when I came out here, I took to the desert to go see the stars and photograph the stars and start to get experience in shooting the Milky Way. And a couple months ago, I saw a picture of a lighthouse that had the Milky Way behind it. And of course, the first person that came to mind was you. It really dawned on me that you were a perfect guest, not only for the podcast, but also for this Outdoor Adventure series. And I would love to perhaps chat a little bit and you can share your experience and how you can talk about lighthouses and how you use lighthouses as perhaps the anchor for outdoor adventures, for families to go out and explore, how you went out and explored. I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, what you were just talking about, taking pictures of lighthouses at night and putting them against the backdrop of the sky has become very trendy. You may have seen just one picture, Howard, but it's all over. It's viral. I, in fact, just donated my old RV to a gentleman named David Zapatka, who photographs lighthouses only at night. And he's not so much interested in star trails and things like that. He just wants to bring the background of sky more in focus. And I think as our listeners do, that a camera can pack in way much more detail in a picture than our eyes can. And he takes glorious photos and has done a number of museum exhibits with them and a couple of books. So the U.S. Lighthouse Society, I'm on their board of directors, we've decided to enable him to go out and photograph lighthouses in their natural milieu, which is nighttime. I mean, we do use them during the day. They have day marks and people look for them on the shore when they're boating. But nighttime is really their time to shine, no pun intended.
Right.
And so we're embarking on a project to photograph as many of them as we can now at night. And they are so beautiful. It's just enchanting. It makes me shiver when I see these pictures that you just mentioned. And it's also a wonderful chance for docents to take people outside at night and show them the moon, acquaint them with the playground up in the sky. And it's free and it's fun and families love it. Plus they can climb a lighthouse at night and look around and see what the world looks like from the top of a lighthouse at night, and also appreciate the great eye of the lighthouse, the optics that they use. So I'm excited about this project. I have tried to take nighttime pictures a few times myself, but I'm not a great photographer. My husband's better. But we've taken pictures of lighthouses lit up with Christmas lights at night and put them in my books and posted them on social media. So I'm going to leave it to my friend David Zapatka to take my motorhome out and get lots of pictures.
I would love if you could introduce us to David, because I would love to chat with him about this project and about his books, because the nighttime feel, just kind of exploring around the lighthouses. And as you said, the purpose of the lighthouse, it comes in its full glory in the evening as it's guiding ships into safe harbor. And in some ways, I think they get taken for granted. During the daytime, they become the postcard picture, but you don't really see them that much at night.
People are funny about the dark. I've noticed this with a lot of people. I have a neighbor who turns lights on all over his house at night, which, of course, impinges on my sky viewing here in my dark little 8 acres of land. And I wonder, why does he do that? Why does he not just step outside and take in the glory of the heavens? This is an age-old, ancient practice, looking up at the sky, identifying the stars, drawing pictures in your mind, and using them in a variety of ways to predict the seasons, to know when to plant crops, when to harvest them, when to get ready for winter, and so on. The Nile floods at the time that the dog star Sirius is prominent in the evening sky. And that was sort of like a lighthouse in itself, telling them to get ready. The floods are coming. And, that was a very important time of year for them. So as we look back over the millennia, we know people have done this. And it just makes me feel wonderful to do it myself and know that this is something that really hasn't changed much over the years. The skies are fairly static, at least in human years. Of course, the moon changes and the planets move along the ecliptic. But as far as the stars and the constellations, we're not going to live long enough to see changes in them. But I just wish people would get outside and enjoy it.
Well, it's interesting. When I first came out here, I drove out to the Mojave National Preserve, which is about an hour drive from Las Vegas and over the border into California. I had joined a meetup group, and their specialty was the Milky Way photography. Now, I didn't have my tripod or anything like that, so I was just out there to meet some people, socially distanced, wearing a mask. But I remember I pulled out my chair and I just sat there, and I was thinking to myself, Elinor, this is what I've been missing all my life. I grew up in the Detroit suburbs. I remember Orion's Belt, and because that was very prominent in the winter sky. And I remember always seeing the constellation Gemini, Castor, and Pollux, but I never knew what it was. And it wasn't until I came out here that I realized these are the parts of the constellation and then everything that went with it. And it's just, your 8 acres, in the dark environment, and shame on your neighbor for not really appreciating it. But just to be able to sit outside and enjoy the quiet and the dark and the sounds of nature and enjoy the sky. I think COVID has given many of us that opportunity to explore and to, for the sake of better words, get out of town and enjoy, some of the dark sky, enjoy some of these lighthouses that are perhaps in a little more remote areas.
Absolutely. Rather than sitting inside watching television or whatever it is you do, get yourself one of those lawn chairs that flops down flat and a blanket and just go outside. You don't need a lot of equipment. There's plenty to see with just the naked eye. Lay down on your chair and look up. And it takes humans a good 10 minutes for their eyes to completely adjust to the dark. And you will be shocked at what you can see after 10 minutes. Suddenly, what looked like a few hundred stars is now thousands of stars. And some of the Messier objects, those little smudgy places in the sky that show us where galaxies and nebula and other objects are hidden, they begin to come into view as little faint smudges. And it just gives me a sense of how big the universe is, to know that when I'm looking out there at some of those stars, the light that's hitting my eye has taken hundreds of years of travel to reach me. And is that star still there after all those years? It begs some really existential questions when you're looking up at it. I absolutely love it. And if there's a lighthouse nearby, you're not going to have that much intrusion of light into your viewing. It's not like a big city and the loom over a horizon that you get from, say, New York or even your Las Vegas, which is lit up like mad.
Right.
But once you get away from that, then you're going to see a lot. Absolutely. Of course, you have to be along the ocean or the Great Lakes to team up the stars and the lighthouses. But there are plenty of places.
Yeah, so you've got the East Coast, you've got the Great Lakes, and I would imagine even perhaps the western states like Oregon, Washington, et cetera.
Oh, yes, they all have lighthouses. Alaska, Hawaii, even the territories that belong to the United States, Guam and, the Marianas Islands, they have lighthouses. Puerto Rico has lots of lighthouses. And there's a couple of them in the far-flung equatorial islands that belong to the U.S. One of them is a memorial lighthouse to Amelia Earhart. It was the last place that she made contact with anyone before she disappeared. And so there's a lighthouse built in her honor there. So they're everywhere.
It's interesting, as I've begun to explore dark sky photography and taking the Milky Way and the Andromeda Galaxy, was able to get that, and the Orion Nebula, especially the Milky Way, is when there's a new moon is that there is no light being reflected from the sun. And so the proper positioning of, the individual, the photographer, the astronomer, with the lighthouse. And so what I found is that there's people that plan their vacations around this new moon. I'm curious, can folks go out, perhaps visit the lighthouse? And you kind of talked about it a few minutes ago, and get involved with some of maybe the nighttime exploration. But do you think or do you know of like lighthouses where people can perhaps camp out on the property or perhaps near it and perhaps have access to the property so that they can use the lighthouse, for example, as the foreground, and then you have the Milky Way, as the background in the picture? Do people camp out? Can do that?
Yes, you can. There are a few around the country that happen to be situated on or near campgrounds. The one that comes to mind is the Westport Lighthouse in Washington State at Westport, Washington, which is a very small town, and there's very little light to interfere with night sky viewing, and a fabulous beach there. So, yeah, you can. There's a couple of camping areas around it, and I believe there's one RV space right below it, which I'm happy to tell you I occupied at one point. It was a wonderful night. I laid on my bed with the window opening, looking up at the beacon going around and around, flashing red and white, and I was just in lighthouse heaven. But yes, there are. Look for them near state parks. Quite a few of them are in state parks. Umpqua River in Oregon's in a state park. There are a lot of them, and there's some books you can get, I think, on Amazon, I'm sure, that list lighthouses that have lodging, either a campground or you can actually stay in the keeper's quarters, which would be very comfortable and lovely and a nice place for a family to go. So, yeah, and then you could capture those wonderful photos of lights and stars and darkness and Milky Way. The Milky Way, by the way, a lot of people don't know what that is. I'm sure you do, having gone out with some of these stargazers. But it's called the Milky Way because long ago people believed that the mother goddess Hera had squirted milk from her breast up into the sky, and it stayed there.
Oh my!
And of course, we know they believed a lot of childish things because they simply didn't have the scientific ability to believe otherwise. And they were illiterate, so telling these stories were ways to pass along information generation to generation. But when you're looking at the Milky Way, you are looking across the plane of our Milky Way galaxy. So there's the Milky Way galaxy and then the Milky Way up in the sky. Our solar system, the sun and our neighboring planets, we're all out about 3/4 out on this disk of stars that forms the Milky Way galaxy. If you think of it as a big frisbee, we're almost to the edge. So if we turn and look up at the sky and we see that hazy, milky trail that seems to go from one horizon to the other, we're actually looking into our galaxy through billions and billions of stars toward the center. If we look in other directions, well, there aren't as many stars because the galaxy's flat like a frisbee. It's big spiral, but it's flat. So I like to think about that. My gosh, how many stars are there in this galaxy? A whole lot, to be sure.
Well, it's interesting. I remember many years ago, I was in an astronomy class where I grew up in Oak Park, Michigan, and we had a planetarium. And I remember a question was asked of our teacher, within our galaxy, where were we located? And what you've just described, it's mind-boggling to think that when we actually see the core, so when we talk about the core in the photography space, it's looking towards the center of the galaxy, which in the northern hemisphere, we really see it during, starting around this time of the year from, midnight, and then eventually we'll see it in the evening as the summer progresses. What you just said, it's mind-boggling to think that we're on this outer portion of the spiral. And yet, even when we see other galaxies like the Andromeda galaxy, the fact that we can see it, it's mind-boggling how immense it really is, that we can see it as a smudge with our naked eye, but then with a good camera or a telescope, we can see more definition. And it's like, and they're all over there. They're all over. It's mind-boggling.
Oh, they are. The deeper you look, the more you see. And Andromeda is enormous. It's way bigger than our Milky Way galaxy. So imagine somebody on a planet in Andromeda looking toward its center. Their Milky Way must be really, really thick and heavy with light. Really.
And that is the true pleasure of, just as we had described earlier, just getting outside and enjoying the quiet and the darkness. Let your eyes, get acclimated to the dark sky and just relax and enjoy yourself. And you can't get any better entertainment than that.
You can't. And everywhere I go, and I hope everybody else would do this, I look at the sky because it's not always the same. It depends on your latitude or your distance north or south of the equator. And so when you go to a place like New Zealand or Australia, both of which I have been to and spent many weeks, you're seeing a different sky. You don't see the North Star down there, of course. We're too far south in those countries. But you do see the Southern Cross, which is the corollary of the North Star if you're sailing down south. And you see different stars and different constellations that were named by sailors. So there's one named after a telescope and one named after a clock and funny animals and so forth. We know that the old constellations we have up north here that we see were named by the Greeks. And they never traveled south far enough to know that there was a whole different sky down there. One of the funny things that my husband still has trouble wrapping his head around is that the moon is backwards, if you will, when you look at it from Australia or New Zealand or anywhere in the southern hemisphere. It runs across the sky backwards to what we're used to up north. The phases look different because they're backwards. It's just fun to look up there and say, hey, I'm upside down. How did I get down here?
With really humility to your husband, I can appreciate that. It is kind of mind-boggling.
It is. And he's been exposed to this for years, and he absolutely loves it. I used to work in a planetarium, and he would come and listen to me. And even our son, who was only 10 at the time, got so knowledgeable about the night sky because Mom worked in a planetarium, he did a show for people one day. And it's just extraordinary how excited and passionate you can get about it. Thinking about those connections to antiquity, as I said, and then knowing that, just today they sent out the little helicopter on Mars and putzed it around to look at it. So we've gone from not being able to read and write and telling stories about the sky to actually traveling out there. And if you think it's a long way to Mars, well, we're not going to get to any of the other stars in our lifetime unless we figure out a way for humans to go into a state of deep sleep, hibernation, not wake up for 10,000 years. And then what do you have? You don't know anybody.
It's enticing to think about it. I mean, if some intelligent life suddenly appeared, I guess the question is, would you go with them? But I think just to be able to explore and to see the distant stars and to see even what it looks like. I mean, see what Mars, for example, when you're on the surface of Mars, what the stars look like. And I'm sure it's a whole different perspective. I mean, when the vehicle first landed on Mars, there was a lot of memes out there of, this is the view of Mars. This is the view of the stars, and here's Earth from Mars. And it's like, it turned out to be obviously a fake, but it's kind of curious what that view would look like and how different it would be.
Yes. Well, one of the best-selling pictures of all time was called Earthrise, and it was taken by the Apollo astronauts from the moon. And it's simply gorgeous to see that you're on that barren place that the moon is, and to look back at our beautiful blue planet rising above the lunar horizon and look at the colors of it. And we absolutely know we're a water planet when we look at that picture.
Right.
Everything's blue. Yeah, I love it. I have a poster of it, in fact.
I just wish we took better care of it, but that's a whole other conversation. And in your, confluence with the astronomy, the photography, and in the lighthouses, where are some of your favorite nighttime photographs that you have taken? Where are they?
Well, surprisingly, one of my favorites is taken in Honolulu on the face of Diamond Head. There's a lighthouse down at the base of Diamond Head, and it's there to light the reefs that surround Oahu on that side. And there are lots of them. And so you want to keep all vessels way off. That lighthouse was established, I believe, about 1890 for that purpose. But it's a very pretty place, and the commandant of the Coast Guard district in Honolulu lives there. Lucky dog.
Yeah.
And I went there one evening at night with John, and he had his tripod, and we took pictures of the lighthouse on at night. And we didn't really notice so much when we were there, but when we this was back when you had to develop pictures, they were slides, and I took them to a developer. And when I got them back and we looked at them, we said, wow, that lighthouse illuminates the reef like you wouldn't believe. You could actually see fish swimming around and the different color of the water above the reef as opposed to where it went deep and dark blue. It was just the most charming picture. And it makes me reiterate that, your camera sees way more than you do. And I love that one. I love it. And there's a good-sized city right behind it. But fortunately, Cocoa Head is just beyond it. So if you go around Diamond Head toward Cocoa Head, you get a nice dark view. I also have a beautiful image of Ponce Inlet at night, and it looks very spooky and very scary. I've used it time and again in magazine articles and slideshows, and now, of course, I do PowerPoints to talk about how haunted lighthouses seem. In the dark, you climb up the stairs and The echoes are there, the shadows. Lighthouses are kind of moist inside, so sometimes you feel like there's a clammy hand on your shoulder, or just the feeling, the hair-raising feeling of entering that very humid atmosphere. Then all the tragic things that happens, mostly at night, you've got a pretty scary picture. This particular picture has the clouds illuminated behind the lighthouse. So it's a really pretty one. Yeah, I just got dozens of nighttime pictures that I love.
Well, you now know what my second opportunistic request is. If you would share a couple of pictures with us so that we can put those on our show notes, we'd love it.
I will. I'll send you pictures.
Fantastic. Elinor, it has been a pleasure to, have you join us again on Success Insight and for the Outdoor Adventure Series. I now have it's a goal, desire, it's a want to go and explore a lighthouse at night when it is a new moon during the proper time of the season, so I can have the lighthouse as my foreground and the Milky Way as the background, because just the idea of doing that and capturing that image and exploring the great outdoors and really the history of lighthouses, the fascination with stars. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. So thank you.
And it's all free. It's all free.
Yes.
You don't have to pay or have a ticket to look at the sky.
I love that. Before we head out, once again, if you would share with our listeners, if they would like to learn more about you and your work, where are the best places for them to go?
I do have a website, www.elinorDeWire.com. I have a blog I do, elinor.dewire.blogspot. You can find me all over Amazon under my name, Elinor DeWire, for my Lighthouse books, and my pen name, J.J. Scott, under which I write novels. And, a girl is never far away from her passions when she's penning a novel. There's lighthouses and skies in my novels, too. I just can't help myself where that's concerned. I know a lot about it. I love it. And so they end up in there.
Well, I say good on you. And
thank you.
You have this niche that you developed many years ago as a way to spend time while your husband was in service, and what you have done with it is just amazing. And again, when I saw this picture of the lighthouse with the Milky Way, you were the first person that came to mind.
Oh, I thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. So we'll definitely, Elinor, provide links back to your websites and your blog and all your social sites, including the Amazon authors page as well. And who knows, someday post-COVID, I definitely want to cross paths, have a cup of coffee, tea, perhaps maybe enjoy it near a lighthouse. But it's been an absolute pleasure, again, to have you on Success Insight and our Outdoor Adventure Series. And this episode's another fantastic addition. So thank you again so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
All right, folks, we have just been chatting with Elinor DeWire, and she is an award-winning researcher, photographer, and writer. She writes novels, she writes books about lighthouses, and we learned today that she's also a very accomplished astronomer, has taught astronomy, and really some really cool ideas about the outdoor adventure, getting out and exploring the lighthouses, perhaps at night, camping, perhaps at the foot of the lighthouse or in one of the parks nearby. And then even if you get it just right with that new moon, with the right location, having that beautiful lighthouse in your foreground and having the Milky Way in the background, I don't think it gets any better than that. So we hope you are as excited about today's episode of Success Insight and the Outdoor Adventure Series as we are. And do let us know when you visit us at successinsightpodcast.com. We would love to hear your comments about this episode or any other episode. You can also find us on LinkedIn and Facebook on our Success Insight podcast pages, as well as on the major podcasting platforms. And of course, this episode will be added to our playlist, the Outdoor Adventure Series, on Spotify as well. Okay, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. Wear your mask, practice social distancing, take care of yourselves, take care of your family, and we will see you on the next episode of the Success Insight Podcast. Take care now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.